Andrew Miller, a successful telecommunications magnate, was ready to return to his fast-paced life after a harrowing heart attack. As he prepared to leave the hospital, a mysterious nurse named Laura warned him not to attend a crucial meeting that same afternoon. Andrew, determined and confident, ignored her advice, only to find himself caught in a web of conspiracy, betrayal, and danger orchestrated by those closest to him. Little did he know the warning from this unfamiliar nurse would lead him on a journey that would not only save his company but reunite him with a long-lost family member, changing his life forever. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. As the morning light spilled through the blinds of the opulent private hospital, casting a golden hue across the pristine room, Andrew Miller sat poised, eager to leave behind the sterile walls that had confined him for weeks. At 55, Andrew embodied the pinnacle of success, a telecommunications mogul with perfectly silvered hair, sun-kissed skin, and a commanding smile that exuded confidence. Yet beneath this polished exterior, the recent weeks had been nothing short of a personal nightmare. A sudden, life-altering heart attack had struck in the middle of one of the most critical business deals of his career, forcing him to halt everything. Now, after what felt like an eternity, Andrew was ready to reclaim his throne and resume his role as the mastermind of his empire. The thought of returning to his company, his office, and his deals brought a renewed fire to his spirit. "Mr. Miller, are you ready to be discharged?" came the calm voice of Dr. Ramirez, his primary physician, as he stepped into the room. Andrew, already impatient, nodded vigorously. "More than ready, doctor. I have a critical meeting this afternoon, and there's no way I can afford to miss it." Dr. Ramirez's brow furrowed in concern. "Andrew, I strongly advise against this. Your heart is still fragile, and pushing yourself too hard could have serious consequences." Andrew waved off the warning with a dismissive tone. "I've been resting for weeks, doctor. My heart can handle it. My company can't wait any longer." The doctor sighed deeply, recognizing that any attempt to dissuade this stubborn businessman would be futile. "Fine, but at least promise me you'll follow the guidelines and take it easy." Andrew offered a distracted nod, his mind already consumed by thoughts of the multi-million-dollar deal awaiting him that afternoon, a deal that could transform his business forever. As he signed the final discharge papers, a young nurse quietly entered the room. She was strikingly beautiful, with long chestnut hair and emerald eyes that carried an air of mystery. Andrew glanced up at her briefly, sensing a flicker of familiarity in her face, but quickly brushed it aside. "Mr. Miller," the nurse spoke softly, her voice steady yet filled with urgency, "I know this isn't my place, but please don't go to that meeting today." Andrew froze, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "Excuse me, who are you, and what gives you the right to tell me that?" The nurse hesitated, her gaze full of intensity. "My name is Laura, and I just know something bad will happen if you go. Please, trust me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with an ominous weight. Before Andrew could demand more from her, she turned and quickly left the room, leaving him bewildered and slightly irritated. "Who does she think she is?" he muttered under his breath as he finished dressing. The idea of letting a stranger dictate his actions was laughable to a man like Andrew. Ignoring her cryptic warning, he made his way to the hospital entrance where his sleek, black luxury car awaited him. "Take me to the office, Rodrigo," he instructed his driver as he settled into the plush leather seat. His thoughts were already on the afternoon's agenda, but a small, nagging voice in the back of his mind kept replaying Laura's words. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. As the car navigated through the bustling city streets, Andrew couldn't resist glancing back at the hospital. He thought he caught a glimpse of Laura, standing at a third-floor window, her expression a mixture of concern and sorrow. Shaking his head, he pushed the image away. "Nonsense," he muttered to himself. But even as the car merged into the flow of traffic, a creeping unease lingered. The towering skyscraper of Miller Telecommunications loomed ahead, a symbol of his power and ambition. Andrew strode through the lobby with purpose, the surprised whispers of employees echoing around him. "Mr. Miller, it's wonderful to see you," his assistant Martha greeted him, her eyes wide with astonishment. "The board is already assembled in the conference room." Andrew gave a curt nod. "Good. Get the Phoenix project documents ready. We're sealing this deal today." His confidence was unshaken, but as he ascended in the private elevator, the nurse's warning echoed in his mind again. Why had she been so adamant? What did she know? His thoughts were interrupted as the elevator doors opened, revealing the boardroom filled with his colleagues. Andrew. Back so soon. Richard Green, the company's vice president, and Andrew's longtime friend, greeted him with a grin, though there was a hint of caution in his voice. Are you sure you're up for this? Andrew forced a smile, concealing the weight of his lingering doubts. I'm more than ready. Let's get started. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. Andrew presented the Phoenix Project with his usual charisma and authority, outlining the vision for a groundbreaking communications platform that would disrupt the entire industry. The board members nodded along, some offering questions, others silently admiring his determination. But despite the smooth progress of the meeting, a sense of foreboding clung to the air, a feeling Andrew couldn't shake, no matter how hard he tried. As the meeting wore on, Andrew couldn't shake the growing sense that something was off. The subtle shifts in the atmosphere were unmistakable. Fleeting glances exchanged between board members, hushed whispers barely audible but laden with tension. The room seemed to crackle with an undercurrent of unease, one that Andrew couldn't quite place. Then, in the middle of his carefully rehearsed presentation, something caught his eye. Richard, his vice president and trusted confidant, discreetly slid a document across the table to another board member. Andrew's pulse quickened when he recognized the logo on the paper. Global Communications, his fiercest rival. Suddenly, Laura's cryptic warning rushed back to him, her voice echoing in his mind like a distant siren. Could this be what she had meant? Was there a plot brewing right under his nose? Andrew kept his composure, but internally his thoughts were in a whirlwind. He scanned the room with renewed scrutiny, noticing things that had escaped him earlier: the way certain board members avoided his gaze, the visible discomfort in others, and the shared nervous energy permeating the room. Each new observation heightened his suspicion. By the time the meeting concluded, Andrew was drained, both physically and mentally. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't yet grasp the full scope of the betrayal that seemed to be unfolding. Great job on the presentation, Andrew, Richard said, approaching him with a smile that felt more like a mask than an expression of genuine warmth. We should celebrate your return. How about dinner at my place tomorrow night? Andrew forced a nod, his mind still swirling with doubt and questions. Sure, Richard. Tomorrow, he responded, his voice distant. As he left the boardroom, it felt as though the weight of the day had aged him by a decade. The usual pride and satisfaction of leading a meeting were absent, replaced by a gnawing sense of uncertainty. Laura's words, once easily dismissed, now seemed to pulse in his thoughts. How could she have possibly known something was amiss? What did she see that he hadn't? The urge to uncover the truth gnawed at him, driving Andrew to head straight for his office. There, surrounded by the familiar luxury and power symbols of his empire, he sat down at his desk. He needed answers. He needed to dig deeper into the board members' recent activities, review key documents, and perhaps make a few calls. It was becoming clear to him that he had just stepped into a web of deceit, and the rules of the game were hidden from him. As Andrew stared out of his office window at the sprawling city, he realized he was now playing a dangerous game of corporate survival. Laura's warning had been the first move, a signpost pointing to a larger, dark conspiracy. Somewhere out there, a young nurse named Laura was likely looking out of her modest apartment window, wondering whether her decision to warn a man she barely knew had been the right one. Despite the uncertainty, something deep within Andrew stirred a feeling that he had just begun to unravel history that could cost him everything he had worked so tirelessly to build. By the time Andrew returned to his sprawling mansion that evening, the day's events weighed heavily on him. The exhaustion was more than just physical, it seeped into his bones, leaving him feeling vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt in years. All he craved was a quiet drink in the sanctuary of his study, where he could attempt to make sense of the turmoil swirling in his mind. But peace was not what awaited him. Mr. Miller Maria, his loyal housekeeper of over 2 decades, greeted him at the door. A package arrived for you this afternoon. I left it on your desk as usual. Andrew's brow furrowed. He wasn't expecting any deliveries, and the idea of an unannounced package arriving on such a day set off alarm bells in his head. With a growing sense of dread, he made his way to his study. The room was a monument to his success, lined with leather-bound books, awards, and mementos from his illustrious career. But on his gleaming mahogany desk sat a plain manila envelope, unassuming yet ominous. Hands trembling slightly, Andrew tore open the envelope. What he found inside sent a cold wave of shock through him. Confidential documents, internal memos, private emails, and even transcripts of phone calls detailing a web of deception and betrayal. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Certain board members had been conspiring behind his back, leveraging his health crisis to plot against him. The heart attack hadn't just been a personal ordeal, it had provided the perfect opportunity for a coup within his own company. Andrew slumped into his chair, the weight of the revelations pressing down on him. He had always considered himself invincible, unshakable in his position at the top. But now, for the first time, he realized just how precarious his empire truly was. Laura's warning, the strange behavior of his colleagues, the unsettling meeting, all of it had led to this moment. A storm was coming, one that could destroy everything he had built. And Andrew Miller, a man who had spent his entire life in control, was about to be thrust into a battle for his survival, one where trust was a rare and dangerous commodity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Andrew knew that the game was far from over. It had only just begun. "Impossible," Andrew whispered, flipping through the incriminating documents, his pulse quickening with every page. The betrayal lay bare before him: plans to leak proprietary company secrets to his fiercest competitor, strategies to undermine his authority, and, most painfully, discussions to use his heart attack as leverage to oust him from his empire. But one name among the conspirators stood out, glaring at him like a dagger aimed at his back: Richard Green, his trusted friend for decades. The realization hit him with the force of a train, leaving him breathless. He slumped into his chair, his mind racing, grappling with the gravity of the situation. How had he missed the signs? How had he been so blind to the snakes that had slithered into his closest circle? As he sat there, reeling, one thought cut through the chaos like a knife: Laura, that mysterious nurse who had warned him just hours earlier. She had known. She had tried to save him from this very moment. With newfound urgency, Andrew snatched up his phone and dialed the hospital, his fingers trembling. "Good evening," he said, barely containing the panic in his voice. "I need to speak with a nurse named Laura. She was assigned to my floor during my stay." A long, uncomfortable silence followed on the other end. "Sir, I'm sorry," the receptionist finally replied, her voice uncertain. "There's no nurse by that name on our staff." Andrew felt the room spin. His breath caught in his throat as dread clawed at him. Who was Laura? Why had she warned him? And what was her connection to all of this? His thoughts were interrupted as he stared at the stack of documents before him. Among the pages of betrayal and deceit, one undeniable truth crystallized in his mind: this conspiracy was much larger than just a hostile takeover, it was personal. And just as the weight of that realization settled in, the door to his study creaked open, and there, standing in the soft light, was Laura. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "Father," she whispered, her eyes filled with unspoken pain and longing. The words, so simple yet so powerful, echoed through the room like a forgotten melody, one that Andrew hadn't heard in years. For a moment, he was frozen, stunned by the realization that the nurse who had warned wasn't a stranger at all. She was his daughter. The daughter he hadn't seen since she was a child. The daughter he thought he had lost forever. Despite everything, Andrew felt deep within himself that he had always known. The connection had been there, even if he hadn't recognized it. He stood up slowly, meeting her gaze. "Laura, I never imagined," his voice faltered, overwhelmed by the tidal wave of emotions flooding his heart. She stepped forward, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I've been searching for you, and now that I've found you, I'm not letting you go again." Andrew took a deep breath, looking into her eyes, the same eyes that reminded him so much of the woman he once loved. At that moment, he made a vow. "We'll face this together," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll bring these traitors to justice, and then we'll finally have time to be the family we were meant to be." A smile broke across Laura's face, a smile that seemed to mend the years of separation and heartache. "That sounds perfect, Dad." That single word, "Dad," sealed a bond between them, an unbreakable pact of love and loyalty. Together, they delved into the documents, piecing a plan to expose Richard and the rest of the conspirators. Little did they know, as they worked late into the night, that Richard Green and his accomplices were already accelerating their schemes. The battle for the soul of Miller Telecommunications had begun, and the stakes were far higher than anyone could have foreseen. The next few days were a frenzy of activity for Andrew and Laura. They spent every waking moment poring over documents, making calls, and piecing together the threads of the conspiracy. Andrew played his role perfectly, feigning ignorance as he moved cautiously through the company's halls, watching his so-called allies with a discerning eye. Richard, once so confident, now seemed jittery, his gaze darting around the room whenever Andrew was near, his whispered conversations halting abruptly whenever Andrew entered her. One afternoon, while hunched over the cluttered table in Laura's modest apartment, Andrew had a sudden realization. His eyes widened as he held up a set of documents. "The Phoenix Project," he muttered, more to himself than to Laura. "It's not just a new platform, it's the linchpin of the entire plot." Laura looked up from the papers she was reviewing, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Mean?" Andrew laid out the papers before her, his mind racing. "Phoenix isn't just an upgrade, it's revolutionary. If we launch it, it could reshape the entire industry. And if the competition gets their hands on it." Realization dawned on Laura's face. They'd be unstoppable. Global Communications could use Phoenix to dominate the market. Andrew nodded grimly. "Exactly. I believe that's their endgame. They don't just want to weaken us, they want to steal the entire company, with Phoenix as the crown jewel. And I'm almost certain Global is behind it all." As the weight of his words sank in, Laura's expression darkened with resolve. "Then we need to stop them before it's too late." Andrew met her gaze, a spark of pride flickering in his chest. His daughter was as sharp and determined as he was. "We will," he said firmly, "but we have to be careful. If they suspect that we're onto them, they'll strike first." Together, father and daughter began to finalize their plan. But as they prepared for the showdown, Richard Green and his co-conspirators were already setting their trap. A trap that could cost Andrew everything. The clock was ticking, and the battle for Miller Telecommunications and Andrew's legacy was about to reach its climax. With newfound determination, father and daughter intensified their efforts, working day and night to uncover every thread of the conspiracy. Laura, whose technical abilities exceeded Andrew's expectations, spent hours behind her laptop, breaking into encrypted communications that were previously hidden from their eyes. Each discovery brought them closer to exposing the betrayal that threatened Andrew's company and his legacy. Late one evening, Laura leaned in closer to her screen, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the monitor. "Look at this," she said excitedly, motioning for Andrew to join her. "They've scheduled a secret meeting for 3 days from now. All the key players will be there, including the CEO of Global Communications." Andrew's eyes lit up with a mix of satisfaction and hope for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "Perfect," he murmured, a smile creeping across his face. "That's where we'll catch them." The plan they crafted was daring and fraught with risk. Andrew would call for an unexpected press conference that would coincide with the conspirators' clandestine meeting. While the media distracted the public, Laura would sneak into the meeting venue, gathering irrefutable evidence of the treachery they had uncovered. The stakes were high, but both knew this was their only chance to expose the plot and save everything Andrew had built. On the eve of their carefully orchestrated plan, Andrew invited Laura to dinner at the mansion, a first for them as father and daughter. As Laura entered the lavish home, the sheer grandeur of it left her momentarily speechless. The chandeliers, the art-lined halls, and the expansive rooms spoke of a life of immense wealth and success, one she had never known. Andrew, sensing her unease, smiled warmly as he poured them both a glass of wine. "You know," he began, his voice tinged with emotion, "I never thought I'd have the chance to sit at this table with my daughter. Sharing a meal like this, it's something I thought I'd lost forever. Thank you, Laura, for bringing that back into my life." Laura's heart swelled, and she returned his smile with one of her own. "I never thought I'd meet my father, let alone share a moment like this. It's like fate has given us a second chance." As they enjoyed dinner, the heaviness of their situation temporarily faded away. They exchanged stories, Andrew reminiscing about his youthful adventures with Carmen, Laura's mother, and Laura sharing tales from her childhood. Laughter echoed in the grand dining room, and for a brief shining moment, they were just a father and daughter, reconnecting and rediscovering a bond they had been deprived of for so long. But as dessert came to an end, the weight of reality settled back in. Andrew's phone buzzed on the table, interrupting their fleeting sense of normalcy. He glanced down to see a message from Richard. "Andrew, we need to talk. It's urgent. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., in my office." Andrew's expression darkened as he showed the message to Laura. "It seems they're catching on," he said, his voice tinged with tension. "We'll need to be even more careful." Laura's face hardened with determination. "I'll be ready, Dad," she said, her voice unwavering. "No matter what happens tomorrow, we'll face it together." That night, as Laura slept peacefully in one of the guest rooms, Andrew sat alone in his study, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. In his hand was an old photograph of Carmen, her radiant smile frozen in time. His heart ached with memories of the life they had once shared. "I promise you," he whispered to the picture, his voice barely audible, "I'll protect our daughter, and I'll make sure they pay for everything they've done." The next morning dawned with a sky as heavy and somber as the day ahead. Rain pattered against the windows as if the heavens themselves were preparing for the storm that was about to descend on Miller Telecommunications. Andrew arrived at the office early, his mind sharp and focused, despite the emotional weight he carried. Today would be the day everything came to light. At precisely 10 a.m., Andrew walked into Richard's office, his posture straight, his face unreadable. Richard stood to greet him, his smile strained, his eyes betraying the nervousness simmering beneath his polished exterior. Richard began, gesturing for him to sit. "I'm glad you came. We need to talk. There's something important we have to discuss." Andrew sat down, his gaze never leaving Richard's. "I'm listening," he said calmly, though his mind was already racing, anticipating every possible move. He had spent years trusting this man, only to find betrayal hidden behind that familiar face. Now he had to navigate this final confrontation with the same cunning that had built his empire. Richard, still trying to maintain his composure, leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Look, Andrew, things have been happening within the company, things that are beyond our control. I'm telling you this because we've always been friends. We're trying to keep the company safe. But with everything that's happened to you, well, the board thinks it might be time for you to step aside." Andrew's heart pounded in his chest, but he maintained his calm exterior. This was at the moment of truth. "Step aside," he asked, his voice cool and measured. "And whose brilliant idea was that?" Richard swallowed, the tension in the room thickening. "It's not just me, Andrew. It's the board. They're worried about the Phoenix project and what it means for the future. They're afraid that well, that your heart attack was a sign that maybe you should take a step back." Andrew leaned in, his eyes locked on Richard's. "You're not worried about my health, Richard. You're worried I'll stand in the way of your plan to sell off this company to Global Communications. But here's the thing, you and the rest of your little conspirators won't get the chance." The room fell silent, and for a brief moment, Richard's mask slipped. His eyes widened and his mouth twitched, as though he were struggling to find the right words. Andrew stood, his voice like iron. "I know everything, Richard, and so will the world. You'll pay for this betrayal, every last one of you." As Andrew turned to leave, Richard's face paled, and he stammered, "Andrew, wait." But it was too late. The storm had arrived. Andrew sat back in his chair, his face an unreadable mask. "I'm listening, Richard," he said, his voice calm, though inside he felt the anger simmering. Richard cleared his throat, clearly trying to maintain an air of confidence. "You see, some of the board members and I have been discussing the future of the company. Given your recent health scare, we believe it might be a good time to consider new leadership and opportunities." "New leadership, new opportunities?" Andrew asked, playing along. "And what sort of opportunities are we talking about?" Richard leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "We've received a very attractive buyout offer, Andrew. A generous proposal from Global Communications. We think it's something worth seriously considering." Andrew felt the betrayal surge inside him, but he kept his cool, nodding as if in contemplation. "I see. And this buyout, does it include the Phoenix project?" Richard's eyes flickered with surprise, caught off guard by Andrew's direct question. "Well, yes. The Phoenix project is one of the most valuable aspects of the deal." Andrew stood up slowly, exuding calm authority. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Richard. I'll consider it carefully." As Andrew walked out of the office, he could feel Richard's gaze boring into his back. He knew that Richard and his co-conspirators were racing against the clock, but Andrew had no intention of letting them win. The battle was far from over. It had only just begun. Meanwhile, Laura was preparing to execute her part of the plan. Disguised in a sharp, professional suit and armed with a fake identity, she made her way to the Ritz Hotel, where the secret meeting between the conspirators and global communications was scheduled to take place. Her heart pounded with a mix of adrenaline and nerves, but her determination was unwavering. She was doing this not just for her father, but for the family they were just beginning to reclaim. At exactly 3 p.m., Andrew stood before a packed room of journalists in the Miller Telecommunications conference hall. The press, having received a last-minute invitation, buzzed with anticipation, curious about the sudden announcement. Andrew stepped up to the podium, his expression resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd, "I've called you here today to share a critical update about the future of Miller Telecommunications." Meanwhile, in a luxurious suite at the Ritz Hotel, Laura had successfully infiltrated the meeting. She blended seamlessly into the background, posing as an assistant, her hidden recording device capturing every word spoken between the conspirators and the global communications executives. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear that the sale of Miller Telecommunications was already in motion. Laura's heart raced as she realized how close they were to pulling off the betrayal, completely unaware that Andrew was, at that very moment, exposing their treachery to the world. Back at the press conference, Andrew spoke with a quiet but unshakable conviction. "In recent days," he continued, "I have uncovered a conspiracy within my own company. A small group of individuals, including members of our board, have been plotting to sell Miller Telecommunications to our competitor, Global Communications." The room erupted with gasps and frantic whispers. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks as reporters scrambled to capture Andrew's every word. He held up a stack of documents, revealing evidence that detailed the conspiracy in full, including emails, contracts, and internal memos. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "And now," Andrew said, his voice rising as he reached the crescendo of his announcement, "I have lived proof of this conspiracy. As we speak, these individuals are meeting at the Ritz Hotel, finalizing their deal with Global Communications." With a flourish, Andrew pressed a button, and the giant screen behind him flickered to life. The audience gasped as a live video feed from the hotel suite appeared on the screen. Richard Green, along with several other key conspirators, was shown sitting at the negotiating table with Global Communications executives, their faces frozen in mid-discussion. The tension in the room was electric, and the press went into a frenzy, shouting questions and exclamations of disbelief. In the hotel suite, chaos erupted as the conspirators realized they were being recorded. Richard stood up abruptly, his face pale with shock. But it was too late. Their betrayal had been broadcast to the world. Back at the conference, Andrew remained composed, though the satisfaction of exposing their treachery glimmered in his eyes. "As you can see, the truth has come to light," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Effective immediately, all individuals involved in this conspiracy are suspended from their positions, pending further legal action. Miller Telecommunications will remain independent, and the Phoenix Project will proceed as planned under the leadership of those who remain loyal to this company." The room erupted with applause, the journalists clamoring for more details as Andrew left the podium. He had won the first battle, but the war wasn't over yet. In the hotel, Laura slipped out of the chaotic suite undetected, her mission accomplished. She smiled to herself as she made her way back to the car, knowing that together, she and her father had struck the first blow in reclaiming not just the company, but their lives. Andrew leaned in slightly, intrigued by Laura's sudden shift in tone. "What about Elena?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with curiosity. Carmen's mother had always been a distant, almost mythical figure in his mind, someone he had lost touch with after the painful separation from Carmen. Laura hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "Well," she began, her fingers tracing circles around the edge of her plate, "Grandma Elena was the one who raised me after Mom passed away. She was strong, incredibly strong, but there was always something she kept from me, something about you." Andrew's heart clenched. The mention of Carmen brought back a flood of memories, both beautiful and painful. He remained silent, allowing Laura to continue. "It wasn't until after Grandma passed away that I found a letter she had written to me. In it, she explained everything about you, about why she kept me from you." Laura paused, looking down at her hands as if she were still processing the weight of the words. "She said she was trying to protect me, but also that she regretted not telling me sooner. She knew how much it hurt both of us, but by the time she realized it, she thought it was too late to fix things." Andrew's chest tightened. He had spent so many years wondering why Carmen's family had kept him in the dark, Why they had never let him know about his daughter. The thought of lost time, of missed moments, weighed heavily on him now. "I'm so sorry, Laura," he said softly. "I wish I could go back and change things." Laura reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to apologize, Dad. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. And that's what matters now." Her words, so filled with forgiveness and hope, eased the ache in his chest. Andrew looked at her with newfound admiration, realizing how remarkable his daughter was. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a second chance. And I promise I'll never let anything come between us again." The air in the room softened as they sat in silence for a moment, savoring the profound connection they were rebuilding. For Andrew, the last few weeks had been a whirlwind of betrayal and redemption, of heartbreak and healing. But here, in the quiet of his mansion, with his daughter sitting across from him, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. As they continued talking late into the evening, sharing stories and laughter, Laura's mention of Elena lingered in the back of Andrew's mind. There was more to her story, something left unsaid. He could sense it. But for now, he was content to let the moment unfold naturally, without pushing for answers. He knew they had time. Time to heal, time to grow, time to rediscover the bond they were always meant to share. When the evening drew to a close, and Laura prepared to leave, Andrew stood at the door with her. "Laura," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I'm so proud of you. You've been through so much, and yet you've become an incredible person." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, but she smiled. "Thank you, Dad. It means everything to hear that from you." They embraced, the hug long and full of the love they had been denied for so long. As Laura walked down the steps of the mansion and into the night, Andrew watched her, a mix of pride and gratitude swelling in his heart. As he closed the door behind him, Andrew felt a deep sense of resolution. The battle to save his company had brought him something far more precious, his daughter. And for the first time in years, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't face them alone. Andrew tensed at the revelation. His mind struggled to process the news that Elena, the woman he believed had long passed, was alive and had been living in secret all these years. The weight of those lost decades, the lies, the pain pressed heavily on his chest. He gripped the letter tightly, his knuckles white as he stared at it. "What is it?" he finally asked, his voice taut with tension, as if bracing for the final blow. Laura hesitated, taking a deep breath before she spoke. "A few months ago, just before I reached out to you, I received a letter from Grandma Elena." Andrew's gaze sharpened, curiosity mingled with disbelief. "A letter? I thought she died years ago." Laura shook her head slowly. "That's what Mom and I thought too. But it turns out Grandma's been alive this whole time. She's been living under a different name, hiding out in South America." Andrew felt his stomach drop. "Hiding? Why?" His voice trembled, the flood of questions building. Laura reached into her purse and pulled out a worn, crumpled envelope. "I think it's better if you read it yourself." She handed it to him, her eyes full of empathy and apprehension. With trembling hands, Andrew tore open the envelope, his breath uneven as he unfolded the letter. As he began reading, the room seemed to close in around him. "Dear Lorela, if you are reading this, it means I finally found the courage to confront my past and my deepest regrets. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or that of your mother, and certainly not that of Andrew. But before I leave this world, I must attempt to explain the choices I made so long ago. More than 2 decades ago, I committed the greatest mistake of my life. I tore your parents apart. At the time, I truly believed I was protecting Carmen from what I saw as a life of uncertainty. But I was wrong. Over the years, I've watched from afar as my lies shattered not only the happiness of Carmen and Andrew, but yours as well, my sweet granddaughter. The weight of this guilt has burdened me every single day. Recently, I became aware of the conspiracy against Andrew within his company. I still have a few old contacts, and through them, I managed to gather critical information about Richard Green's treacherous plans. I've enclosed this information on a USB drive attached to this letter. I know this cannot erase the damage I have caused, but perhaps it can help protect Andrew and provide a chance for you two to reconnect. Laura, my final wish is for you to find your father and tell him the truth. And if, by some miracle, Andrew reads these words, Andrew, I am deeply sorry. My actions, though misguided, were made from a place of love, a love that was blind to the consequences. I pray that, if not forgiveness, you might find some understanding in your heart. With all my regret and love. Elena Davis. The letter slipped from Andrew's fingers and fluttered to the floor. He stood frozen, his mind a maelstrom of emotions: anger at the years of deception, sorrow for the love lost, confusion over Elena's choices, and a strange, unexpected flicker of understanding. He had despised Elena for so long, believing she had died taking her secrets with her. Now, to learn that she had been alive, and not only alive but helping him from the shadows, left him shaken. "When did you receive this?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper as he turned to face Laura. "3 months ago," she replied softly. "It was the push I needed to find you. The information on that USB drive. It's what helped us uncover the conspiracy." Andrew's legs felt weak, and he moved to the window, staring out into the quiet darkness of the night. His thoughts swirled in a chaotic storm, replaying the moments of his life that had been shaped by Elena's actions, the loss of Carmen, the years without his daughter, and the loneliness he had endured. Now, in one letter, everything he thought he knew was appended. "All these years," Andrew murmured, his voice cracking as he spoke, "all the pain, the loss, and now this." He closed his eyes, trying to steady himself, but the tidal wave of emotions crashed over him. Anger and pain warred within him, but so did a small, growing understanding. Elena had been wrong, but she had tried to make amends in the only way she knew how. Laura stood up from the table and walked toward him, her presence a comforting reminder that they were no longer alone. "Dad," she said gently, "I know this is a lot to take in, but what matters now is that we're here together." Andrew turned to her, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "I spent years hating her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought she took everything from me, and in a way she did. But she was also trying to protect us, misguided as it was." Laura placed her hand on his arm. "She made terrible mistakes, but she tried to fix them, even if it was too late for her to do it in person. And because of her, we're here now." Andrew nodded slowly, processing it all. The bitterness of the past was still there, but it was softening, slowly being replaced by the realization that a new chapter was beginning, a chapter where he and Laura could finally build Larry. He pulled Laura into a tight embrace. "We can't change what happened," he whispered, "but we can make the most of the time we have now." Laura smiled, her heart full of hope. "We will, Dad, we will." As they stood there, holding each other in the dim light of the room, the weight of the past began to lift. The path ahead wasn't without challenges, but for the first time in decades, Andrew felt something he thought he'd lost forever: hope. Andrew looked over the papers spread out on the table, his face a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. The revelation that Elena had been living under a false name for years still gnawed at him. But now, the idea of confronting her, of finally hearing her side, made his pulse quicken. "Elena Gomez," Andrew muttered, shaking his head. "It's hard to believe she's been here, hiding all this time." Laura glanced up, sensing her father's internal struggle. "Do you think she's ready to see us? After all these years?" Andrew sighed deeply. "I don't know, but one thing is clear: we need answers. She owes us that much." They spent the afternoon poring over the information, organizing their thoughts and preparing for what they might encounter. Both felt a mix of emotions: anger, curiosity, and an unexpected sense of hope. The trip, they knew, wasn't just about confronting Elena, it was about healing old wounds and perhaps, finally, laying the past to rest. The following morning, they set off early, their destination a small, secluded town nestled in the countryside. The drive out of Buenos Aires was long but scenic. Laura couldn't help but marvel at the rolling hills and distant mountains, the vineyards that stretched for miles, and the rustic charm of the region. As they neared the town, Andrew felt the weight of the past pressing down on him. He had spent years hating Elena for what she had done, believing she had taken away his chance at happiness and his family. But now, here he was, about to confront the woman who had unknowingly brought him and Laura back together. "Are you ready?" Laura asked gently, sensing the heaviness in her father's silence. Andrew nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Ready or not, this is something we have to do." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The town itself was quiet and unassuming, with narrow cobblestone streets and old colonial-style houses that looked like they had been frozen in time. It was the kind of place where secrets could easily be buried, where people could disappear into anonymity. They arrived at the small house where Elena had been living, a modest dwelling surrounded by a garden of wildflowers. The air was still, almost eerily so, as they stood in front of the gate. Andrew's heart raced as he stared at the door, the final barrier between him and decades of unanswered questions. Laura gently squeezed his hand. "I'm here with you, Dad." Taking a deep breath, Andrew led the way, knocking on the weathered wooden door. The seconds that passed felt like an eternity. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back into a neat bun, her face lined with the passage of time but unmistakably familiar. Elena's voice trembled, her eyes wide with shock and a glimmer of recognition. For a moment she stood frozen, her gaze flicking between Andrew and Laura, her lips parting in disbelief. "Elena," Andrew said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years, "it's time we talk." Elena's eyes filled with tears as she stepped aside, allowing them to enter. Inside, the house was simple, almost Spartan, a far cry from the luxurious life Andrew had known. It was clear she had been living a quiet, solitary existence. As they sat down in the small living room, the tension was palpable, but also the undercurrent of something else, an opportunity for reconciliation. "I never thought I'd see you again," Elena whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Not after everything I did." Andrew's eyes were cold, but his tone was measured. "We've read your letter, Elena. We know what you did, why you did it, but it's not enough. We need to hear it from you." Elena nodded slowly, wiping at the tears that had begun to fall. "You have every right to hate me, Andrew. I made a terrible mistake, a mistake that I've regretted every single day. When I separated you from Carmen, I thought I was protecting her. But I was wrong. I destroyed your family. I destroyed my own." Laura sat beside her father, watching the woman who had been a ghost in her life for so long. Her own emotions were conflicted. Part of her wanted to blame Elena, to rage against the years they had lost. But another part of her saw the frailty of the woman in front of her, a woman broken by her own choices. "Why didn't you tell me the truth when I was a child?" Laura asked softly. "Why didn't you let me know who my father was?" Elena looked at her granddaughter with eyes full of sorrow. "I was too ashamed. By the time I realized my mistake, so much time had passed, and I didn't know how to undo the damage I'd caused. I thought it was too late, so I hid." Andrew clenched his jaw, trying to keep his emotions in check. "And then you decided to live under a false name in another country, all while we thought you were dead." Elena's voice cracked as she answered, "I couldn't face the truth, Andrew. I couldn't bear to see what my actions had done, so I ran. But I never stopped watching from afar. When I heard about the conspiracy at your company, I knew I had to do something. It was my last chance to make things right." There was a long, heavy silence in the room as Andrew and Laura absorbed her words. The anger, the betrayal, the pain, it was all still there. But so was the glimmer of understanding, of closure. Andrew finally spoke, his voice soft but resolute. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Elena, but I can't deny that your actions helped me and Laura find each other. For that, I'm grateful." Elena nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "That's more than I deserve." Laura reached out and took Elena's hand. "Maybe we can't change the past, but we can decide what happens next." Andrew looked at his daughter, seeing the grace and strength that reminded him so much of Carmen. He sighed, the tension in his chest beginning to ease. "I think it's time we let the past rest," he said quietly, "for all of us." And with that, the three of them sat in the small living room, the weight of the years beginning to lift, the broken pieces of the past slowly starting to mend. The road ahead wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long time there was hope. Andrew's frown deepened as Laura's words lingered in his mind. Maybe part of her wanted to be found. It was a thought that haunted him as they prepared for the next leg of their journey. The small town they were heading to, hidden in the countryside yet not far from the bustling energy of Buenos Aires, seemed an odd choice for someone who wanted to disappear. But perhaps Laura was right. Maybe Elena's choice had been a subconscious call, a way to leave a trail behind for them to follow. The town itself was like stepping into another time. Colonial-style houses, cobblestone streets, and the soft chatter of locals greeted Andrew and Laura as they walked through the narrow lanes. People stopped to glance at them, their faces curious, unaccustomed to strangers in their quiet corner of the world. After asking around, they were finally directed to a small house on the outskirts of town. Its garden was overgrown, wildflowers mixing with weeds, but it showed signs of past care, or reflection, perhaps, of the woman who lived there. Andrew's heart pounded in his chest as he knocked on the wooden door. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Then came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps from inside. The door creaked open, revealing an older woman, her once dark hair now completely white, her face marked by deep lines. But her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, had not dulled with time. Elena Davis, or Elena Gomez as she now called herself, met their gaze with a mix of surprise and resignation. "I knew this day would come," she said, her voice tired but steady. "Come in. We have much to talk about." The house was modest and furnished simply, but it exuded a sense of quiet solitude. Once seated in the small living room, an uncomfortable silence settled over them, thick with unspoken words. Andrew struggled to find the right words. All the anger he had carried for years felt tangled in the moment. It was Laura who finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "Grandma," she began, her tone gentle yet firm. "Why? Why did you keep the lie going for so long?" Elena closed her eyes for a brief moment as if summoning the strength to answer. "At first it was pride," she admitted. "I thought I was protecting Carmen, saving her from a life I didn't think was good enough for her. But over time, it became fear. Fear of what would happen if the truth came out. I was afraid of losing her, of losing you, Laura." "And Mom?" Laura asked, her voice trembling with the weight of years of unanswered questions. "Did she ever know the truth?" Elena's face crumpled slightly as she shook her head. "Not at first. She found out bits and pieces toward the end of her life, but by then it was too late. I had already damaged everything beyond repair. I couldn't face her pain, her disappointment. That's when I left. I came here to escape the mess I had made." Andrew had remained silent until now, the bitterness inside him rising like a storm. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and laced with years of grief and anger. "You took everything from us, Elena? Years we can never get back. Moments we'll never live. How could you justify that? How could you be so selfish?" Elena didn't try to argue or defend herself. Tears welled up in her eyes and slipped down her weathered cheeks. "I don't have an excuse. Andrew," she said, her voice breaking, "I don't expect your forgiveness. I only wanted to tell you the truth before my time ran out." With shaky hands, Elena rose from her chair and walked to an old desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, worn manila envelope. Slowly, she crossed the room and handed it to Andrew. "This is everything I kept from you over the years. Letters, photographs, newspaper clippings. I couldn't face you then, but I saved everything. Maybe this will help you and Laura understand and recover some of what was lost." Andrew hesitated for a moment, his hands trembling as he took the envelope from her. The weight of it felt symbolic, a physical manifestation of all the lost years, of all the memories they should have shared. Laura moved closer to her father, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder as he carefully opened the envelope. Inside were fragments of the life they could have had, letters Andrew had never received, photographs of Laura as a child, newspaper clippings chronicling her milestones. Together, father and daughter sifted through the contents, their emotions swinging between grief and wonder. It was like glimpsing into a parallel world, one where they had been a family from the start. Andrew's throat tightened as he held a photograph of a young Laura, her smile a mirror of the girl he had missed watching grow up. Elena watched them from her seat, her face etched with silent regret. She knew there was no undoing the damage, no making up for the years that had been stolen from them. But as she watched Andrew and Laura, she saw something she hadn't dared to hope for, a flicker of connection, a chance for the future. Andrew finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion but carrying a note of resolution. "We can't change the past," he said, looking down at the letters and photographs scattered on the table. "But we can decide how we move forward." Laura nodded, her eyes wet with tears but filled with determination. "We're here now, and that's what matters." The three of them sat together in that small, quiet house, the weight of the past still present but no longer crushing. There were no easy answers, no sudden resolutions, but there was a beginning, a tentative step toward healing. The road ahead would be difficult, and forgiveness would not come easily. But for the first time in years, there was hope. The future, as uncertain as it was still theirs to shape. As they sat in that modest living room, the silence was no longer suffocating but peaceful, a space where the broken pieces of the past might one day find a way to fit together again. Laura's voice cracked with emotion as she looked at her father. The weight of his words hung in the air, filling the space between them with a depth that only years of longing and loss could create. Andrew, too, felt the intensity of the moment. The sun's first rays were painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, a quiet contrast to the whirlwind of emotions that had engulfed them both. "You don't have to say anything," Andrew whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I just want you to know that I'm here, truly here." and I'm not going anywhere." Laura nodded, wiping away the tears that had begun to spill over. It was more than she could have ever hoped for, this sense of belonging, of finally having her father by her side. She had spent so many years wondering what it would have been like to know him, to have him in her life. And now here they were, on the other side of a painful journey, trying to build something new out of the broken pieces. As they sat together on the balcony, the past no longer seemed as unbearable as it once did. Yes, they had lost time, precious, irreplaceable time, but they had also found each other. That was something to hold on to. "I've been thinking," Laura began, her voice tentative. "Now that we know everything about Grandma Elena and the truth about what happened, what do we do with all of this?" Andrew looked at her thoughtfully. The envelope, now spread out with its precious contents, had given them answers but also left them with decisions to make. "I don't think there's a simple answer," he admitted. "Part of me wants to put all of this behind us, move forward without letting it define us. But at the same time, it feels like we've just scratched the surface of the story. There's so much more to understand." Laura nodded in agreement. "I don't want to let the past control us, but I also feel like it's part of our healing. Knowing everything, even the painful parts, helps us understand who we are." Andrew smiled softly at his daughter, seeing in her a reflection of the wisdom and strength that had once drawn him to her mother. "Carmen, you're right," he said. "We can't just bury the past, but we also don't have to let it dictate our future." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the sunrise chased away the last traces of night. It was a new day, one that felt full of possibilities. "Do you think Grandma Elena will ever be part of our lives again?" Laura asked hesitantly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. She wasn't sure how to feel about her grandmother after everything that had come to light. The betrayal, the years of deception, the guilt that Elena had carried for so long, it was all still fresh. Andrew sighed deeply. "I don't know, Laura. That's something we'll have to decide together. She made terrible choices, and there's a lot to forgive. But she also gave us something valuable in the end. She helped us find each other. That doesn't erase the pain, but maybe it's a place to start." Laura considered his words carefully, feeling the complexity of the situation. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Maybe one day." As the sun rose higher in the sky, the two of them lingered on the balcony, sipping their tea, the envelope of memories resting beside them. The future was still uncertain, filled with questions and challenges they hadn't yet faced. But for the first time in a long time, they faced it together as father and daughter. "I think we've both had enough drama for a while," Andrew said with a chuckle, breaking the heaviness of the moment. Laura laughed, nodding. "Agreed. How about we just enjoy today and figure out the rest as it comes?" "That sounds like a plan," Andrew replied, feeling a lightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. They spent the rest of the morning talking about everything and nothing, catching up on the years they had missed. With every word, every shared moment, they began to rebuild what had been lost. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, healing never was, but they had each other now, and that was more than enough. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 5 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. By the time the sun had fully risen, the Miller mansion felt less like a place of solitude and more like a home. The photographs and letters, once painful reminders of a life that could have been, now represented hope, a bridge between the past and the future. "Thank you for giving me this chance," Andrew said as they walked back inside, his voice full of sincerity. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm going to make sure you never regret it." Laura smiled, her heart full. "You're my dad. That's all I ever wanted." And with that, they closed the door on the night that had brought them closer, ready to face whatever the future held together. As the final words of Laura's speech resonated through the crowd, Andrew glanced at his daughter, overwhelmed with pride. The journey they had been through, filled with pain, discovery, and healing, had led them to this moment. His heart swelled as he thought about the impact the New Dawn Foundation would have on the lives of others, offering second chances, just as he and Laura had been given. The applause from the audience was thunderous, but amid the cheering and clapping, Andrew's gaze wandered to the back of the room. There, almost hidden in the shadows, stood a familiar figure, Elena. Her face, lined with age and remorse, was wet with tears as she watched the culmination of their family's journey toward healing. Though she remained distant, Andrew could sense the weight of the moment for her. Despite everything, she had been the one to set this reunion in motion, however painfully. Laura noticed her grandmother too. She hesitated for a moment, emotions flickering across her face. Then, as the applause began to fade and the event neared its conclusion, she excused herself quietly and walked toward the back of the room. Andrew watched as his daughter approached Elena, his breath catching in his chest. He wasn't sure how this reunion would unfold, but whatever happened next would be significant for all of them. Laura reached Elena, her steps slow but purposeful. Elena looked up, surprised, her eyes filled with uncertainty and guilt. "Laura," she whispered, her voice trembling. Grandma Laura replied softly, standing in front of her. There was a long, heavy silence between them, filled with all the unsaid words from years of separation. Laura looked into her grandmother's eyes, seeing not just the woman who had wronged them, but a woman who had suffered in her way. Her voice wavered slightly as she spoke. "I don't know if I can fully forgive everything, but I do know that without you, Dad and I might never have found each other. You gave us a second chance." Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never expected you to forgive me, Laura. I just wanted to see you happy, even if I could never be a part of it." Laura took a deep breath, her heart full of conflicting emotions. Maybe one day you can be. It's not something we can fix overnight, but we can start by trying." The tears in Elena's eyes deepened, and for the first time in decades, a small, tentative smile broke across her face. "I'd like that very much." Laura leaned in and gently hugged her grandmother, the embrace tentative but full of hope. It wasn't the end of the pain, nor a complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a step toward healing what had been broken for so long. Andrew, standing at the front, watched the scene unfold with a heavy heart, his emotions a mix of relief, sorrow, and gratitude. Laura returned to his side after the quiet moment, her expression more peaceful than before. Together they stood side by side, knowing that the road ahead would not be easy, but feeling a sense of renewal and strength in facing it together. As the evening drew to a close, Andrew and Laura exchanged a look of shared understanding. The journey that had begun with betrayal and loss had transformed into something beautiful. Through the foundation, they would create opportunities for others to heal and reconnect, offering the same chance for redemption that they had found. The New Dawn Foundation would not just be a symbol of the Miller family's past, but a beacon of hope for countless others who needed to rebuild, reunite, and rediscover what truly mattered. In the quiet moments after the event, as they left the stage and headed toward the reception, Andrew turned to Laura. "You were incredible up there," he said with a smile. "Your mother would be so proud of you." Laura smiled softly, her heart full. "And she'd be proud of you too, Dad, for everything you've done and for the man you've become." They stood together, looking out at the city lights beyond, knowing that their story had come full circle. The future was still uncertain, but it was theirs to write together as a family. Eleanor Davis stood quietly, her heart full of conflicting emotions as she watched Laura and Andrew embrace the family she had once broken, now coming together. She had traveled from Argentina with a heavy heart, unsure if her presence would be accepted. But she couldn't stay away. She needed to see what had become of the lives she had influenced so profoundly, for better or worse. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Eleanor gathered the courage to step forward. Her hands trembled slightly, her voice unsteady as she approached Laura and Andrew. I didn't know if I would be welcome," she stammered, her voice almost a whisper. "But I had to come. I had to see this with my own eyes." Laura's face softened immediately. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and hugged her grandmother tightly. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered, her voice filled with a tenderness that reflected the healing already underway in her heart. The years of pain and resentment didn't vanish in an instant, but this moment felt like a new beginning. Andrew stood a little distance away, his expression unreadable. His eyes flickered with a mix of emotions, old wounds still fresh, yet something deeper, a desire for peace. After a moment of hesitation, he extended his hand toward Eleanor. "Thank you for coming," he said, his tone neutral but sincere. It wasn't an outright gesture of forgiveness, but it was an olive branch, a start. Eleanor's eyes welled with tears as she accepted his hand. It was more than she had dared to hope for. That night, as the celebration wound down and the city of lights slowly transitioned into darkness, Andrew found himself once again on the balcony of his mansion, the place where so many of his reflections over the past months had taken place. The cool breeze swept over the city, and as he stared out at the sparkling lights below, he felt a strange sense of calm, as though the weight of the past was finally lifting. It wasn't gone entirely, but it felt lighter. Laura quietly joined him on the balcony, leaning against the railing as they both gazed at the city in comfortable silence. The bond they had rebuilt in such a short time felt as if it had always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. After a while, Laura broke the silence. "You know," she began softly, "Mom used to tell me that the stars are the souls of our loved ones, watching over us." Her voice carried a nostalgic warmth, a memory of Carmen that felt almost tangible in the night air. Andrew smiled, his throat tightening with emotion, as unshed tears glistened in his eyes. "Your mother was always a romantic," he said with a soft chuckle, "but I like to think she's right. That somehow she's here with us, watching everything we've accomplished, everything we've been through." Laura nodded, her conviction clear. "She is," she said quietly but with certainty. "I can feel her." They stood there for a while longer, father and daughter, connected by both loss and love, gazing up at the stars that felt like a reminder of Carmen's presence. Each was lost in their thoughts, but the shared silence felt comforting, a moment of peace in a world that had been anything but peaceful for so long. Andrew finally spoke, his voice low but filled with determination. "Laura, I know I can't make up for all the years we lost, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. You are the most important thing in my life now." Laura, feeling the sincerity in his words, leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "I know, Dad," she said softly, her heart full of gratitude. "And you're the most important thing to me. I'm just grateful that despite everything, we found our way back to each other." The night deepened around them, but the future felt bright. Andrew and Laura remained side by side, facing the unknown with hope and resolve. They knew there would still be challenges ahead, wounds to heal, obstacles to overcome, but they also knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything life threw their way. As they stood there, the stars above seemed to twinkle a little brighter, as if acknowledging the reunion below. Somewhere beyond those stars, Carmen Davis smiled, her love transcending time and distance, finally uniting the family she had always dreamed of having. In that moment, her spirit, woven into the lives of the people she loved most, lived on in the peace and love that now defined the Miller Davis family's future. As we come to the end of this powerful story of loss, redemption, and second chances, we hope it has touched your heart as much as it has ours. Andrew and Laura's journey reminds us that no matter how much pain we've endured, there is always the possibility for healing, growth, and a new beginning. So what have you learned from their story? We invite you to reflect on the lessons this family reunion has taught us and comment below. What is one thing you've learned from Andrew, Laura, and even Eleanor that you will bring into your own life? Whether it's the importance of forgiveness, the courage to face the past, or the value of second chances, we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories. Thank you for watching. And remember, no matter how difficult the road ahead may seem, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow.